Hi and welcome. I'm Jessica Bell, Deputy Director of the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center at NYU School of Law. I'm so glad you could join us today for this great conversation about public interest careers and how you think about getting from here to there. And I want to thank our co-sponsors, Green 2.0, the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU, the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network, New York City Bar Association's Environmental Law Committee, and all of our school and student organization partners. I also want to acknowledge the many individuals and organizations who helped us get the word out about this exciting event and our wonderful team at the center. Our speaker today is Portia Allen-Kyle, a civil rights attorney, public policy expert, and author of the book, Advice to Thrive By: How to Use Your Resume and Cover Letter to Build Your Brand and Launch a Dynamic Public Interest Career, which is what we're here to discuss today. Portia has broad experience in domestic policy, nonprofit public interest organizations, and political advising focused on racial equity and social justice. We are so excited to have her join us today. After we hear from Portia, our student panel will help guide our discussion. These students are Samantha Blend, a 2L at Pace University's Elizabeth Haub School of Law, Fatima Ibrahim, a 2L at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and Tatiana Zapata, a part-time 4L at St. John's University School of Law. And we have a document with bios that we'll be putting into the chat. We'll also have time for audience questions, so please put your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom as you have them, and we'll turn to them at the end. And last, we'll be drawing names randomly from the list of webinar attendees to raffle off 2 signed copies of Portia's book. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Portia.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. It is so great to be here. I am going to begin by sharing my screen so that we can go ahead and dive right in and get started. Wonderful. So first, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to talk about this subject, and primarily because it's the product and the kind of task in which I saw myself carrying forward, being committed to the public interest, having been a public interest lawyer, for my career, how to then make sure that I'm giving back, building the bench, and kind of carrying on that spirit, so to speak. And so wanted to start really by sharing some of the context in which I wrote this. And that is, lawyering in the public interest is nothing more than deploying your skills for the greater good. And I wrote this book because as someone who was always interested in, public interest lawyering, to making the world a little bit better of a place than when I found it, when I got here, right? There was always such a dearth of information that I felt as I was navigating law school and early career spaces, in that there are so many things that you can do. Literally any interest that you have can be done for the public good, right? And in the public interest. But there's no clear career paths to many of the jobs and the opportunities that are out there. And when you do receive advice, or at least when I did receive advice, it was either ill-suited to the public interest journey, or maybe it was useful, but it completely lacked context and was a little bit detached from strategy and overall trajectory. And so, my wise statement, and I'll talk about this in the context of career strategy in the book in a moment, but because I wrote this book, a generation of law students and young attorneys will have the tools to succeed as public interest attorneys, regardless of where they attended law school or whether they had a mentor or pre-existing strong professional support network. And so my goal here was really to provide some of the foundational nuggets of wisdom, so to speak, to help get into the space and get past some of the hurdles, and doing that in the context of a career strategy, but particularly using your resume and cover letter. So I'll talk a little bit, about my journey, and I, really love this graphic that emphasizes career kind of as the place where, my values, my interests, my experience, my education, my network, and I don't just mean professionally, I do, kind of mean personally, and, more so maybe my village is a better way to say it, where all of that comes together and I'm really able to live in my truth and my purpose. And so I grew up in New Jersey, living at the intersections. I went to vocational high school. Um, and was always just really interested in why things were the way they were. Why did the settings in which I went to school look different than that from church, look different than that from other schools, and what are some of the things that really produced some of the experiences surrounding me that I lived through. And so when I got to Wellesley, which was kind of on a whim. I had an internship during my senior year um, with a woman in a marketing department at a financial software firm. And she had gone to Wheaton, and I, looked at her, and she was a really great boss and mentor. And I said, well, she's been pretty successful. Let me apply to Wheaton. And, so I told her I was going to apply to Wheaton, and she said, if you're applying all women's, you should really apply to Wellesley. And that was frankly all I knew about it. In the all women's context, was that like it was a good school, produced successful people, and did that research and ended up there, and it worked out in many ways. But luck and happenstance is probably not is not a substitute for strategy. And again, kind of leaning into where I am today and with this book, something I've really wanted to hone in on and drive home. But the most important thing I think I walked away with from Wellesley, other than the degree, the friendships that I have to this day, was a contextualized understanding of the world around me and my place within it. And from there, knew that I wanted to spend my life and my career trying to trying to even the playing field, so to speak, and working on behalf of particularly Black communities, but communities of color writ large as well. And from there, I went to grad school. I ended up at Columbia and did a master's in African American studies. And the goal there, this was a point in time where going straight into law school was not as common as it as it is today for a number of reasons, but stepped into that space really looking to sharpen my tools. And by that, I really mean kind of my analytical skills, my research skills, et cetera. And then, launch into my law school career. And so leaving there, applied to law school, knew I wanted to, loving my experience doing my master's, knew I wanted to pursue a JD PhD, and that is the track I went on. And I remember talking early on to a friend of mine and saying, I think I want to be, I had a professor at Columbia who was just a fabulous death penalty lawyer, and, spent a lot of time learning from her and talking about, civil rights, et cetera. And I said, I really want to be a public interest lawyer, and a civil rights lawyer particularly. And I want to work at a, large, well-resourced nonprofit. And I want to work at the national level, but, really focus on local impact and local issues. And that somewhat vague idea is what set me down the path of my career. And so went through grad school, went through law school, did various fellowships, internships, and then taught for a while in academia. And when it came time for it, there was a position that I heard of from a former mentor and a former dean when I was in law school. And they said, the ACLU is looking for somebody that understands research and data, but also understands the law and can really bring the two together in meaningful ways. And I wasn't looking for really wasn't looking for anything because I love teaching, but on with that encouragement, stepped in and leaned into that position, applied, and ended up getting it. And that set my career on a little bit different of a trajectory than I probably would have imagined. But through those experiences, worked at the ACLU for a while, moved on, to a startup voting rights organization where I really wanted to both expand my role in setting the vision and also lean into a more supervisory and kind of managerial position. From there, went to a nonprofit technical assistance organization. It's done a lot of policy work. I've worked on campaigns, et cetera, and have, kind of come to this place where I'm now in government. I'm soon to transition out, but, have spent my career really doing the things. I look back and I was talking with that same friend, this is probably close to 20 years later, of all these conversations, and said, setting out that vision, right? I want to be a civil rights lawyer. I want to work at, large resource nonprofits, and I want to work at the national level on local issues. And have been able to look back across my career and have seen how that vision, although looking back, I would probably be more specific, has set the course and the tone for so much that I've been able to do. But through it all, in each step of the way, it's really been important to me to hold the door open, to bring people along. And when, particularly in my segment of my corner of the, sector of public interest, and particularly in civil rights policy, and when you get even more granular, folks that work on Title VI and all the rest of it, there is not a deep bench of people really ready and able to step in and enter these positions. And part of that is doing better at getting people excited, creating the opportunities, and really giving people the tools that they need to succeed to just step in the door. This section of the field is not set up to train very well. It often requires that people come in with the skills. And in that context, then wanting this book to provide the baseline of a strategy and outline for how to get into the door, and one approach, not the only approach by any means, but one approach that that can be used to help get that step forward and that leg up. And it comes down to the strategy itself really comes down to these three parts, and I'll run through each one for you. The first being to start with yourself. That visioning that I mentioned in terms of laying out the desire to, be a civil rights lawyer at a large nonprofit, for example. Things may get added to the vision. Things, may get subtracted, from your visions as you're thinking about them. But it is important to have an idea of where you're going. If you don't have a sense of where you're going, as the saying goes, you'll often end up somewhere else. The second is being the preferred candidate. And that really is about, setting the strategy and in terms of your career and how to acquire the skills that you are, going to need to get to that dream job and that place you want to be. And when I say dream job in this context, especially, while you're in law school, that 10-year mark, roughly, your dream job will look different once you are greatly into the field, but 10 years seems to be about the length of time for folks to kind of really think where these early stages are leading them, and what it would take to get there, and what they should be doing to make sure they stay on that path. And the last part, there's demonstrating growth with a 1+1 approach, and that, in the most straightforward terms, really refers to this idea that you should be growing and not just maintaining. And so learning something new, achieving a critical win, challenging yourself in some way, shape, or form each year. And so I'll go through a little bit more. But essentially, the idea is, by doing each of these, starting with yourself, being the preferred candidate, and demonstrating growth, that this is one way to stand out in the crowd. And it translates very practically, or hopefully translates very practically in terms of, job searches and decisions to be made throughout your career. And so when I say start with yourself, it really is a visioning exercise. And, those of you who enjoy journaling, enjoy planning. If you are like me, I love planning. I, still keep a written calendar. I, color code everything. I plan it out. And I'm very deliberate in terms of how I'm spending my time and how I am, and how the ways in which I spend my time either contribute or if they don't contribute to kind of where I'm trying to go professionally. And there are other balances in terms of personal life, family, et cetera. But it really helps me to hone in on where I need more focus, where I can, allocate more resources, where I'm spending too much time. And that visioning allows you to kind of set the parameters for what you want your life to look like. And so knowing more and understanding what you are deeply passionate about. And when I say passionate, I mean, I actually mean passion, what will motivate you to do something every day. If it's not for the rest of your life, but at least for some significant portion on the path to that. And what drives it. And that involves getting more specific than just an issue. I am passionate about civil rights, but civil rights writ large is not necessarily what like gets me up and gets me going. What really drives me are these specific it's always a new intellectual challenge and puzzle and problem to be solved in terms of what levers can be pulled to architect policy and bend the arc towards justice. And like that intellectual challenge that has real world implications drives me in every single move that I have in various aspects of the day on a regular basis. Thinking about what change you want to make in the world. And I often frame this question to myself in terms of, and this is how I develop my why statements, like I shared with you, in terms of by virtue of you doing something, what do you want to be true, right? Like what impact or outcome do you want to happen simply because you had your hand in something or, had your, that you were involved or made your mark. The spending your time similar to what you're passionate about, how you'd like to spend your time is really critical. And similarly, knowing how you don't want to spend your time. There, are folks that love writing, love editing, love the mechanics of it, could brief all day, write beautifully. It's always prose. There are other people that are just not interested in spending their time in that type of way. Instead, enjoy the interpersonal aspects of the profession, that enjoy the oral, and relational nature, and kind of making proving points and bringing folks along in different ways. But that is something that's something to spend a little bit of time on to hone in and see what makes sense. And then last, this is a small profession. It's a small world generally. Being an attorney is even smaller. I know they usually say 6 degrees of separation. I feel sometimes maybe like it's 2, depending on where you are, but especially in the New York area. What you want your reputation to be and what you want to be known for. And that is both a substantive question and like what kind of person do you want people to remember you for? And I think back to my days in law school and taking LRW, and there was always somebody that would rip the required page, that people need to cite to or need to research out of the book. And like, do you want to be that person? Is that how you want to establish yourself, as a crab in a barrel throughout the rest of your career? Or do you want your interpersonally to be known as a great colleague, a supporter, a friend, somebody who will lend a hand, a ear, etc.? Do you want to be known reputationally as like the go-to person on cannabis regulations? Or, do you want to be known as there's someone who I love and admire is like the foremost authority on, bail in New Jersey. And like, that's the one of the many things and skills, but it's a reputation and one that you live up to. And this visioning should involve your questioning all of that. And so as you are writing out this vision, and I encourage you to write it out, it should just be specific. It should include your why. It should be well informed, and that really goes to doing your research and be grounded in reality. And being grounded in reality is not to say dream big, but it is to say dream practical. And so if big is your dream, then it'll be even more important to break down practically the many steps on the way. And so being the preferred candidate, and the first thing here, overcoming imposter syndrome, is it's so important, and it's something that so many of us suffer from, including myself, right? Constantly questioning, like, should I be here? Should I be in the room? Am I smart enough? Do I know enough? Do I know the right people? And what I've found through it all is that, and this isn't a cure-all, but just one way that I use and have encouraged others to use and seen some success in terms of keeping imposter syndrome in check, is developing a plan for career growth that involves going above and beyond, not just hitting the baseline. Because there is a certain point where it's not just about, are you meeting the baseline qualifications? Are you a lawyer? Are you committed to the mission, et cetera? But instead, do you have those preferred qualifications? 3 years doing X, bilingual in Y, things of that nature that often end up in job descriptions in the preferred qualification category. If you think of your strategy as aiming to acquire those skills, there comes a point where and you'll still have these the notion sometimes of imposter syndrome. I don't really have the cure for that, but I do have an objective list of things that when I'm questioning whether or not I'm qualified, I can pull out my accomplishments and line it up with a job description and tell myself that I'm knocking it out of the park, right? The second, identifying competencies of your dream job. So again, I would think of this and your visioning that you're doing in the context of, a 10-year plan, so to speak. And the great news is that as law students, as early career attorneys, you're uniquely in a place and a space to continue to learn and grow your skills. And that is the purpose of your journey in the moment. And so if you'd like to work on, do immigration work, for example, like focus coursework that, would give you some of those skills, perhaps admin or immigration specific courses, internships, to that end, would be great, as well as, thinking about acquiring a foreign language and doing so at a professional proficiency level. And then lastly, and this kind of, rounds out the others, focusing on an employer's nice to haves. And that really is being able to look, sometimes it is listed very straightforward as preferred qualifications. Oftentimes it is not. And it is being able to determine what a employer and what a target opportunity is really looking for, and figure out how to give yourself the competitive edge by having that in your toolkit, in your pocket. And so wanted to give an example. So this comes from a legal director position announcement. It's, usually a position that, people step into, whether deputies or directors around by the 10-year mark, certainly. And, list out the required and then the preferred qualifications. And so here, just wanting to kind of illustrate it, it's often not enough to say like, wow, I have really strong oral advocacy and research and writing skills. I am definitely familiar with criminal legal policy, and, I'm mission aligned. And maybe I've been a member of the bar for 3 years. I would encourage you to apply, but, still apply with open eyes, and a recognition of, what a stronger position to apply from would be, right? And that is, acquiring down the line. If this is the type of job you want, then the question is, how do I get 3 years of prior supervisory experience? How do I acquire civil rights litigation experience? Where are the places that I need to go in order to do that? And what are the types of, positions that people work in where they are getting those skills? What does it look like to do policy and advocacy at the agency, both legislatively and at the agency level? And how do I, how do you, in your 10-year journey, make sure that you are acquiring those skills in various ways? And as you are acquiring skills, the 1+1 approach, is really about moving with intention through your career. It is balancing, both your experience in your 9 to 5 and your service to the profession or service to the community writ large. And it really is about both hard and soft skills and how you're acquiring and honing. I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that having done something once does not make you an expert. You will hear a lot of advice to the contrary over the course of your career, but part of this, and the ability to hone in on the skills that you find useful and that may kind of lead you down the path where your 10-year goal, your dream job is more likely, really requires the ability to honestly assess and, to use other outside, outside metrics, outside, feedback, et cetera, to do that assessment. And as you're executing the strategy, at a baseline, do your research. The research part nowadays, especially with social media, is on the easier side and getting easier. If find people who work at the organizations that you're interested in, who hold the positions and the titles that you think you want to have down the line, and see what their experience has been. Did they clerk? Were they on a journal? Were they in private practice first? There are some parts of the field that, are recruit very heavily out of private practice into these public interest roles. And LinkedIn is just a unbelievably clutch tool to be able to do this. And if you would like to do it anonymously, I would suggest taking advantage of the free trial. Identifying the skills to acquire or hone, and being very explicit and focused in what those look like in the upcoming years for you. And making sure that you're keeping track of it. And so I always encourage people to keep a master resume. The resume that you will send out and should send out will be 1 page. It will be your highlight reel. This master resume that you have should house absolutely everything, so that perhaps you are applying to a position now and certain experience, may fall off. You may not have enough room. It may become a little stale or irrelevant. But now you're applying to like something else and you're like, oh man, what did I say in that past version? And you can, begin to pull and shape and build your narrative in ways that are very targeted. And then lastly, leverage or build your relationships. And I specifically say leverage or build relationships because it is relationships. Oftentimes we hear folks and we ourselves are talking about networking, and it sounds like this like really kind of sleazy transactional thing that happens, and like you do it and everyone has to do it. So like maybe it's a little bit less gross and out of it. Hopefully you get a job. And I'll talk about this a little later, but it is more about the people that you are with now and surrounding you, your peers, et cetera. You will all be coming up together, and making sure that you have those solid relationships, that you are kind of reaching back, bringing people along behind you, and again, in service to both your colleagues in the profession. Those relationships are critically important. And so shifting from the broad strategy to, somewhat of the core, and, what I'm referring to here is the fundamentals. So this is this section is less about here are the specific things you must do on your resume and cover letter, but instead really shifting and wanting to think about the approach that people are taking to creating materials in the first place. And the one thing that I would say where many at all stages, many people go wrong is not knowing your audience. And that is, it's the same skill that you're taught in legal writing and anything you do, you have to know who's reading it and what they're expecting. So you're not writing your resume for you. You're writing it, for your target employer or opportunity. And as you're doing that, you want to make sure you're talking to people in their own language and that what is coming across is a brand and an image or to relate to what I mentioned earlier, a snippet of that reputation that you want to be known for and what you can bring to the table. And remembering at this early stage when you're applying, and particularly as law students, like your initial goal when you submit your materials is to get to the interview. Sometimes, people are simply just doing too much by trying to audition and get the job in their materials when there are some situations where, perhaps there is a little bit higher of a threshold there, but often is the case where all you need is to get through the screening to the next stage. And in order to do that, one way to go about and accomplish that goal is looking at job descriptions and being able to parse through and figure out what's important and what kind of decoding a job announcement to determine what folks are actually looking for. And so you'll often, and this is an example of an announcement that's actually up right now in case you know any seasoned folks looking for a deputy GC position at Pearl Def, but just because things are bulleted at the same level doesn't mean that they're weighted equally. And sometimes as people are engaging in their search and setting out to do things, that assumption is made and it's a bad assumption. And so similarly, you can't kind of look here and say, great, I'll highlight my interpersonal skills in my materials and my, resume, and I'll highlight my values while ignoring the preference for nonprofit or government agency experience, ignoring the preference for, deep experience with cross-functional implementing of policies and programs and a track record of success in driving organizational change. And so as you are thinking about, well, what should you do, right? It's really important to avoid some of the common pitfalls. And that being, if you have the opportunity to write a cover letter, and this has, been topics that have gone through LinkedIn and law Twitter and all, the rest of it. If you can write a cover letter in this segment of the profession, write the cover letter. People are reading them. People are determining and making judgments based on, your values and what you bring to the table and whether or not you're a fit and, mission aligned, et cetera, often based on what they are seeing in that very cursory review of a resume and cover letter. And when you're writing the cover letter, it's important to remember that your materials shouldn't mirror each other. And so you want to take advantage of the opportunity that you are providing two separate documents, and they should complement each other. They should, the cover letter should highlight and bring to life some of the information in your resume, but shouldn't just regurgitate information. No one should need Google to figure out what you are talking about. Again, your audience is not you. So, avoid the jargon, avoid the acronyms, avoid listing and taking up precious white space with extraneous information on, fellowships and clubs and, all the rest of it that are, sometimes not core to your objectives. And of course, avoid typos, grammatical errors, and inconsistent formatting. But most importantly, what I really want to drive home, because sometimes as I remember being, in law school, and sometimes my peers were the largest providers of advice, and a skill to be mastered is discernment. and that avoiding bad advice is equally as important as following good advice. And through this effort, I hope that this book, encourage you to buy it, and read. And if you would love to talk about feedback and process, etc., I'm happy to do so. And looking forward to the conversation here. But really making sure that you have the skills to filter out what is not worth it, and then to implement and integrate into your strategy what is. And what you're really trying to do in your core task as you're trying to get to the interview is bridge your past experience with future opportunity. And so again, keep it to one page. Your resume should have the quantifiable facts that support the story that you are telling in your cover letter, right? So your resume gets the facts, your cover letter gets the narrative. And the goal of the package is to demonstrate the interest and provide your highlight reel and leave a reader with just enough information about you that they want to know more. Strongly resist the urge to discuss everything you've ever accomplished. Instead, think about how you can best showcase what you can do for a company with the examples of what you've already done. And I want to kind of drive home, and I'm sure the question will come, that even as law students, you've already done something. And that is sometimes the big question that I get is like, oh my gosh, I haven't done this. I've never had a job. I've never done anything. That is okay. We all start from somewhere, and that place that you start with, is about how you are packaging and talking about transferable skills and background to launch into here. And remember, your social media is a part of your application process. Like, while people don't want to Google what is on your resume, people will Google you. And making sure that you are aware and in control of what pops up in those background searches will be critically important. So I want to just wrap up these remarks with the shout outs to all those who have sponsored and made this event happen today. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. I especially appreciated your advice on imposter syndrome, which I know we all experienced during law school. So the first question that we wanted to ask kind of relates to something you mentioned earlier about different classes to take depending on what topics you're interested in. So it's kind of a two-parter. First, what sort of classes do you think are most effective to help students build their skills for the public sector? And then what skills, within that do you feel students should really hone in on to succeed in the public sector as well?
Ooh, so that's a really great question. And in true lawyer fashion, I'm going to say I think the answer depends. And I think it depends on a few things, though there are a few skills that are universal and will always take you far. And so solid writing and analytical skills are, priceless. Like it is often the prereq, but it is often the primary complaint for many employers that, you're getting people that cannot write, that then they have to spend training on how to write in a certain way. And technical writing varies, but the beauty of it is that it is technical. So there is a formulaic aspect to it all. And that is, as law students, like really what I would encourage folks to master. As far as coursework, I can share for me the courses that to this day have probably been most relevant. I don't know if relevant is really the word, but at least that I, rely on and think back to often, those early moments. And, that is con law and contracts. Knowing the law is so important, but also when, negotiating agreements, knowing what a solid enforceable agreement can look like. And those courses provided kind of the foundations that, were then built upon through later practice and experience throughout my career. Civil rights as a dedicated course was one of my favorites and to this day, most useful. And the other, funny enough, is admin, because I kind of live in the policy spaces and there's a lot of focus on legislative advocacy, but understated and really underutilized, I would say, by many on the public interest side is like administrative, um, well, agency level advocacy, and admin gives a solid foundation to what that can look like and where those levers are in the agency context. Outside of the law, I would say the profession would be better if we, not just language proficiency, and non-English language proficiency, but also research methods and data. I know it's often a joke, people go to law school because they don't want to do math, but turns out math really matters. And there is some very bad law being made because people do not understand research and data. And so would encourage, if you can, to acquire some of those skills.
Thank you so much, Portia. I think all of this information has been so helpful. And we do have another question. So the next question is, what advice do you have for students that are self-conscious about their grades, or maybe not being on certain co-curriculars like a journal? And do employers actually focus on these things as much as, I know I've heard that a lot, that they do focus on it a lot. So do they actually focus on it as much as we think they do?
Yeah. So, in not to be the bearer of bad news, but in my experience, employers, they do. I've sat on plenty of committees where people are, looking at journals, they are, looking at grades, they're looking at clerkships, but it doesn't actually matter because of the particular journal. What people are looking for is a way to sort through sometimes 50, 100, candidates for a particular position where you're trying to hire. I mean, maybe at the intern level, you're hiring like 2 to 5 people in a batch. And, for permanent positions, often, unless you're in a space that hires classes, you're often just hiring for one person. And so for better or for worse, things not just journal, which signals to folks that like you can write, which is important. It's not just grades, which signals to folks not just that you are a good student, but like an element of discipline and rigor as well. But it's also it's also thinking about things, such as like which school people attended, which, whether it's undergrad or, law school, and other ways that as humans, like we just look to sort people. And so sometimes those judgments are interpreted as kind of making value judgments, but it is often people doing the best they can with limited information that just really has detrimental consequences on the ability of like people of color and, women and first generation folks and others to enter this like side of the field. Now, that being said, what I would encourage people to do is to master the content in other ways. And so you don't need to be on journal to write, right? You don't need to be a, 3.5 plus GPA student, which represents all of your classes, to really master the material in the areas in which you say you are committed, right? And so maybe you are kind of at the 2.8 overall, but you've taken a series of contracts, you've taken advanced con law or whatever it is, and in all of those classes you are like hovering at the A territory. Like figure out the story and how you can, there's narrative to everything, and it often is the case, not that something exists, but because people haven't mastered the narrative and the confidence to tell that story and say what it is. I mean, my personal story was I was going through law school. I started part-time, moved to full-time, but like I was a single parent through that entire time that also like worked full time. And, was I committed to getting a 4.0 in all of my grades? Absolutely not. Would have loved it, but life wasn't in the place for that to be my number one priority. My number one priority was making sure I was raising a healthy, well-adjusted child who uh, succeed in the world. And to be seen, but I think I've gotten there in some ways. Um, but if that is the case, then right, like how are you demonstrating other capacities and still, getting into spaces and exposing yourself to things, whether they be conferences, whether they be, book clubs or whatever it is that shows your dedication and your mastery of content and your skills and ability differently.
Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful and insightful. So this is another two-part question. What does transitioning from the nonprofit sector and into the public one look like? And are there any particular drawbacks or advantages to working in the public sector only after experience doing nonprofit work?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start with the latter and say not necessarily drawbacks. Um, and I would encourage, so, before going into nonprofits, like spent a chunk of time in academia, like that was a shift. Going from academia where like your life thrives on your ability to generate ideas and like be the first to, an idea and move the field forward. And that's not the field of law. Like, how lawyers are often judged is their ability to kind of see a situation and a fact pattern and like apply a, past set of rules to that and figure out kind of where things are. It's a different mindset and a different framing. And then from going from nonprofit to government, similarly, just a shift in the way in which things take shape. So for example, so the transition, I guess to answer the first part of the question, was an adjustment. I think a lot of that adjustment is because of the level, so I stepped into government as an appointee who serves at the, pleasure of the secretary and the president. And that is a little bit of a different framing, but what comes through is like mission and accountability to, especially at the federal level, to taxpayers and like the American people writ large. And it is fascinating to see how things operate in furtherance of that mission. And, we have to do this for taxpayers, but, they're looking at us and they're doing this. And it's, kind of funny when you like check yourself in reality. It's like, if they were upset about this, they would have no standing to sue. Like, what is this? But like the narrative of like you're working for the people is a like really strong driver. And I'd also say there's even more of an emphasis on soft skills. And so especially at the federal level, it's very bureaucratic. And relationships are so important just because of the nature of the beast and of the size of, government and how many different levers there are and how kind of diffuse power actually is in bureaucracies. It doesn't necessarily live in one place. And so I guess what I would say in terms of skills to be built and things that I am happy that I had the experience of is managing complex organizational structures. And that's, not necessarily your kind of hard, like I'm a subject matter expert in Title VI, but like, as you're thinking about growth through career, managing more sophisticated and navigating more sophisticated spaces and organizations is also a very meaningful skill to learn and acquire.
Thanks for all this great advice. I have another question that relates to something you were kind of talking about earlier, like, finding the best job that, fits best for you. But what is your advice for people who find a job they feel they're a good candidate for, but it might not be in their ideal field or doing their ideal type of work that they want to be doing?
Yeah, it's funny because that is a scenario that people often find themselves in. And I think, and maybe this will be a little unpopular to say, what I sometimes just want to encourage and say is like, then you're not a good candidate for that position. In that, number one, and I like, and also in working through these conversations, I'm kind of asking like, what makes you think you're a good candidate? Like, what is the thing that you're seeing that you're kind of wanting to do? And the reason for that is, and recognizing there may be very unique circumstances where you kind of apply and take jobs, et cetera, that like are not our dream jobs, but you're taking them, for a purpose, for a, kind of reason, hopefully on your journey to a better place that you love, I hope. um, but the main problem I see with that, um, particularly in the public interest, and particularly if you're interested in mission-driven organizations, and I would really say that includes government, is just this fundamental question, like, how do you authentically convey passion about something that you're not passionate about? And it's hard. And that comes through if you make it if you make it past the screening stage, it comes through in the interview. And if it's coming through in the interview, even if you get the job, when you're leaving to go to the place you want to go, now you're having to explain something that you're like not passionate about on your journey. And what I would say as general advice is that you want to limit the amount of explainaways that you have on your resume. Like, your resume should tell your story. You shouldn't have to tell sub stories and details. And while that happens, I would just, try to be intentional about, making sure that your whole resume doesn't consist of explainaways and details. So, it is somewhat painful to, and it's hard, right? And I think it's maybe hard because I'm an empath and I care about people, but like it is really hard to like have conversations with, folks who are hitting the 5-7 year mark and they're like, I really want to do X and get into shift to public interest and get into certain organizations and or work on certain issues. And it's, oh well, I took this job because I needed a job after law school. And I like took that job because it was a raise from this other job I took, but like, yeah, I know I've been doing personal injury and traffic, but like, I really, really, really am your person to lead your national strategy on like X, right? And like, yeah, like you get it, right? But it's hard to then translate, thinking back to like the 1+1 approach, like there's a way to do that and to be very strategic about it that contributes to, kind of growth every single year. So, perhaps you are, working, on personal injury and, or traffic or whatever it is. And then, that leads you to sit on the bar committee for that particular subject area, or you're publishing kind of practice notes, and writing and contributing to the field on a particular, area. And that led you then to to advocating or, testifying or pushing a bill that would make this practice better. And you want to take those skills and now transfer them to this other issue that is, you can begin to understand like how a little bit better that transfers. But a lot of folks, and I know this is a very long way to answer that original question, but like a lot of times, like if you don't have the passion is often the beginning of the story. And if you don't have the passion and you don't have the interest, it's hard to go be great at a job, right? In terms of being the preferred candidate, not just good at it. And there is a difference.
That's very helpful advice, Portia. Thank you. So this next question relates back to what you were talking about earlier with imposter syndrome. Something that I've noticed in my law school experience, and I'm sure others have noticed, is that there's sort of this herd mentality to do everything that everyone else is doing. So I was wondering, how were you able to focus on your own goals and your own vision in the long run, and to do things at your own pace without getting distracted by what your fellow students and colleagues were doing?
Ooh, so that's a really good one because it's real. peer pressure is real. It's not just like something teenagers go through. Like it exists at every level all the time. But I think one of the hardest things I had to learn, and please accept this with grace as I say it, is like fundamentally that not all people in the same space are in the same place. And that skill of discernment is the ability to know your true peers. Because again, doing something and doing them well are completely different things. And there are folks, especially in this profession, and we all know those people who will just want to like accumulate notches on a belt. And I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and like look really solid on paper. And when it comes to the substance, you realize the emperor has no clothes. And so the reason why visioning is so important and knowing where, you're knowing where you want to go, it helps you maintain a fidelity and like not well, I don't want to do that because everyone else is doing it. It might make sense to do that thing everyone else is doing, but you should know that it makes sense for you before you do it, and help like use that as a personal check. Everything that you engage in some way, shape, or form should contribute to your professional goals. Even as you're thinking about like service or volunteer, this and that. And, it's I say sometimes everyone can serve soup, right? Like, but as you are training to become attorneys, and particularly to attorneys that are going to work in the public interest, it is how are you deploying the skills you have to that purpose? And if that is what everyone else is doing, and that could be a clerkship, it could be, going for a post-grad fellowship. It could be, everyone is doing a common one. Everyone is doing OCI. Should I be doing OCI? If the employers in OCI don't align with what you want to do, then no, probably not, right? Like you should probably be taking that time and using it to identify those opportunities and go for those positions. And so, having your North Star and your why and that vision can be a really helpful tool to not get distracted by the, oh my goodness, I'm not doing a judicial externship this semester. Everyone else is doing a judicial externship. Like, am I going to, fail at life and never succeed, et cetera? And like, it just won't be the case. You're going to be fine.
We have just one final question. So this one is about mentorship, and how would you say you identify mentors and how do you develop these relationships?
It's an interesting question, and it's a good one, because when you think about mentorship, there is something that there's an implied formality sometimes. And I think what I've learned throughout the course of my career is that, like, yes, mentorship can come from kind of those who have trailblazed the path and walked it before myself. It can also come strategically from, peers or other places. It can come in seasons. And I think, we often think long terms, and really in the context of sponsorship, that it is someone who is like guiding you throughout all of your career. But there are ways to approach mentorship and relationship based on kind of where you are in a space and a place. Every workplace I walk into, I'm looking for those who I can learn from. And I'm, can we go to coffee? Can we, sometimes it's like do karaoke, right? Like do something fun, because the goal is relationship building. And as you're relationship building, what I have found is like people will be happy to drop gems and like gems that are, extremely important. And those conversations have been much more, and those relationships have been much more fruitful than, early on, especially in college, as those like network, than like sitting there like, can I pick your brain? What do I need to do to, XYZ? Like, tell me how to do this. Can you help me do this? Like, I don't know you. Like, I would love to probably help you, but like, let's get to know each other. And I think that approach has been useful, because eventually all of you will be in the other spot. You will be approached for being mentors, and you'll kind of remember both what you needed in that moment and what you wanted to hear, and like what just really wasn't helpful and like there. And so being unafraid to reach out, it may be a no, but it is, extending that olive branch to, folks that you think you can learn from is always a good first step and a good skill to have. Just, fear and comfort with cold calling, cold reaching out, but also being nice. Like we're in community as attorneys. It is a small profession. Jessica and I went to Wellesley. Like you just never know where you will come across folks who are in spaces, who know who know people who you want to know, and being nice and being approachable, friendly, helpful, all the things. And like those same approaches will bring mentors to you or transform those relationships where sooner than you know. One of my mentors now, someone was like, this is my mentor. You just need to meet her because she's cool. And like, we just started talking, and years later, she has not gotten rid of me. And like, sometimes it's, just in that way, but it wasn't with the idea of like, I need another mentor. And so really from all over, it is possible. And just remember to pay it forward when you get there. There is like a high school student, a 1L who like is in need of all of you right now.
Well, we are over time. I just want to say thank you to Portia and to Samantha, Fatima, and Tatiana for your participation. That was so incredibly interesting. The recording of this event will be available on our website shortly, and keep an eye on your email to see if you've won the raffle. Truly an excellent book. I'm so glad that we now have this in our profession, and you've shared your wisdom with so many. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, everyone.